Time to cross the T's, dot the I's with the rest of the week's top stories. Joining me now, Fox Business reporter Diane Macedo, Executive Director of Supreme Lending, Rodney Anderson, and my favorite blogger from Hot Air and everywhere else, Ed Morrissey. And we want to start today with these new EPA regulations. It's very interesting because this is that old cap and trade program that never made it through Congress. So instead, they're using new rules under the Clean Air Act to place all kinds of limits on smog-forming compounds, coal, greenhouse emissions, and so forth. And it will cost coal companies a fortune, according to the industry. I mean, a big fortune. Even President Obama admitted back in 2008 when he was running for the office of president that his cap-and-trade plan would send energy prices through the roof. He said, quoting the president, "Under my plan of a cap-and-trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. They would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money, and they will pass that money on to consumers." Rodney, in this time of we're in a fragile economy, and they're talking about this will cost 60,000 jobs, what is he thinking?
Well, we're thinking about right now that many of the regulations are serving as barriers more than filters. We don't need any more regulations out there, but we have to ask ourselves, do we want our kids drinking certain water? You know, where do we stand within the coal emissions, and what can we cut back? But what can we move forward in the part, Tom, where we need to create jobs? No more cuts in jobs. We saw that with financial regulation. Now we're seeing it with this. And what Obama's talking about out in California, we don't need to spread all this throughout the country right now.
Yeah, it's but the argument is, Diane, is that this is for it'll cost less for health care later because all of us will be healthier, breathing cleaner air.
Well, and there are benefits. I think environmental policies, I'm generally a small government kind of girl, but when it comes to environmental policies, I do think that you need government intervention because you need wide participation in order to reap benefits like that. And there are benefits there to be had. That said, like Senator Bond said from Missouri, you can't make these decisions in a vacuum. I think it's important to take into account what's going on with our economy right now. And under the current Clean Air Act, that we weren't due to relook at the ozone levels until 2013. So I think to all of a sudden, out of nowhere, try to rush that is a little aggressive on the administration's part, where I think they could take other alternatives. You know, they're constantly looking for places to spend money, maybe invest more in biodiesel and other areas where we can promote growth instead of trying to put up a barrier for a business that's already giving us a lot of jobs.
It also kind of reminds me of the old no smoking sections in an aircraft. You know, I mean, if we're going to do this, how about the rest of the world? But Ed, you know, they passed the financial regulatory reform, and now we see all kinds of fees going up from the banks. It's costing us more money. Thank you very much for the regulations. This seems to be the same thing. It's going to cost us, and he said, skyrocketing electricity rates. The utilities are going to have to pass on these costs. This doesn't make sense in this economy.
And they are multipliers. You have to remember that they are multipliers through the distribution chain, because each step along a distribution chain, from manufacturer to final sale, requires energy, either in transport or just to operate a business. And so if you raise energy costs, then that becomes a multiplier, a force multiplier through the chain, and it ends up arithmetically expanding the price hit for consumers. And so, yeah, it's going to be devastating for consumers.
Well, and we're trying to get the economy growing here. And he keeps scratching his head and saying, why won't the economy grow? Maybe this is one hint.
Well, I think this is interesting because I think, according to their plans, the EPA was going to roll out these regulations this year and next year, because they thought that the economy was going to be growing with the Keynesian stimulus that they applied in 2009. That obviously has failed, and now this is being exposed as this is going to be a huge hit on an economy that is not working already. And I think that this is more evidence that there is no plan B at the White House on the economy.
We all want clean air. We're all environmentalists, and we all want clean air, clean water. It's just a question of trying to do the balancing, I guess is what you would call it.
And you know what is growing is the number of jobs in federal regulatory agencies and the budgets for those federal regulatory agencies. So we can't figure out where to make spending cuts, but we can certainly keep throwing money into more and more regulations.
Absolutely. Well, we had the big shake here on the East Coast this past week. It was rare. 5.8 earthquake, and immediately a number of things happened. But the thing that caught my attention more than anything else is the cell phone system went down. I mean, it crashed. You could not get in or out. And so when you're dealing with our nation's capital, especially Washington, D.C., which was the biggest city closest to this thing, Are we ready for natural, let alone man-made disasters?
I think it might depend on the natural disaster. You know, New York isn't exactly on a fault line, so it's not like we're prepared for something like an earthquake. And I think when it comes to budgeting, we just talked about priorities, and you're not going to, you know, spend all this money to prepare for a disaster that's very, very unlikely to happen here. That's why we have safe nets. Now, the problem is that, I mean, right now we're in the path of a hurricane, which we actually do get pretty frequently, though small. And 10 of those states, the insurance provided for those houses right along the coastline in high-risk areas, most of them are provided by the state because private insurers have decided that they're too risky. So we're using a safety net, I think, incorrectly. Safety nets should be used for exactly what happened the other day, where we suffer an earthquake, which is completely unexpected. The problem is these people who build their houses on fault lines, who build their houses on a coastline, and then expect the state to pay them when they get hurt by a natural disaster.
So, Ed, what do you make of the lack of preparedness, I guess? They've done so many things and spent so much time, and they have all these drills. But in our nation's capital, I mean, the buildings were evacuated. It was an earthquake, but are we really prepared for something?
I think in part it was just such an unusual occurrence in Washington, D.C. that it's one reason why everybody wanted to get on a cell phone and either start talking about it or tweeting about it or texting about it, which overloaded the system. I mean, I don't think that the system actually went down as much as it got overloaded by use. I don't think you're going to see that same type of thing when it comes to the hurricane, as was mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's human nature, and that's what's going to happen. We saw that in California with large earthquakes. I'm originally a California boy, so I'm used to earthquakes. So what you need to do is you need to make the cell system robust enough to be able to handle those types of peaks. But that's difficult to do because you don't necessarily want to spend capital to expand usage to a point that's only going to be reached maybe once every 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back, Rodney, to, we'll bring it full circle here, is do you spend money on something that is rare?
Well, you'll have to spend money. We learned from Hurricane Katrina that we weren't prepared. And basically, with every natural disaster going on in the country, it gets worse and worse and worse. But what we have to do is, for example, the Twitters, the Facebooks, and everything, for some way, if we ever have natural disasters, we need to find ways to take some of these things down where we can make sure that we're getting to the appropriate people that we need to get down to.
Twitter was alive with everything about what was going on, plus the jokes. So they were all thrown in there. But well, let's hope we don't have to worry too much about that in the future. We do have this story that hit a nerve with the radio audience. It was this mother from Alaska who disciplined her 7-year-old son with hot sauce and a cold shower. She has been convicted of child abuse, but many callers to the radio show said she was right because kids don't get enough discipline. And the hot sauce mom was just trying to be a good mother. You know, the prosecutor, Ed, said that she was just trying to get on television. This was an audition tape to get on the Dr. Phil show. I don't know which is worse, what she did or her motives.
Yeah, I'm a little torn on that one too, Tom. And I am normally uncomfortable with government encroachment into the parental-child relationship, but there is a role for government to protect children. I'm comfortable with the fact that a jury of her peers in her community decided that this was going too far and that this amounted to abuse. I mean, that's the reason why we have a jury system, so that we can make sure that that type of community standard, if you will, is applied in an even-handed manner. And I think that they actually reached the right conclusion here.
Yeah, and Rodney, I mean, this is the thing about anytime we're trying to judge parental authority, and it gets into the question of a spanking to hot sauce. Where is that line?
Well, what happened to the old spanking, the paddle, the belt? You know, those were the good old days. Now we're trying new methods with kids, and those methods in many ways are way over the top. As a parent, you know, of 23 and 21-year-old, in the old days, I believed in the same discipline methods, but not going over the top with the salsa, the cold showers. But as a parent, it's hard because every time you do something, somebody else says, that's abuse. So how do you raise your kids, and how are you protecting yourself and not crossing that boundary because all of a sudden a parent ends up in jail because they may have been doing something just to show the children?
Yeah. You agree?
I do.
Guilty,
you know, the problem is that that line is blurry. You know, what someone considers abuse, another person just considers discipline. I got spanked as a child. I turned out all right. But some people even consider that abuse. And the bottom line is a lot of kids are different. You know, my nephews are the kind of eager to please kids that you yell at them and they're already crying. There's really no need to spank them. And I have other cousins that you literally want to chuck them across the room sometimes because they don't listen. So each kid is different. I think you need to give parents the benefit of the doubt most of the time. That being said, I'm with Ed on this one and saying that, you know, a jury of her peers saw the tapes, saw much more information that we saw in front of us, and they decided that this crossed the line. And I think at the end of the day, you have to give the benefit of the doubt to the justice system in this case.
Rodney, Diane, Ed, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Your chance to win at Comment Roulette is coming up after the break. Stay tuned for more of the Tom Sullivan Show on the Fox Business Network.